area, and I've been homesteading for about 4 years. To let you know a little bit about myself is I've grown up in Florida my whole life. I grew up in South Florida. I didn't have a lot of land. My parents didn't garden. My grandparents didn't garden, and I don't know if their parents really gardened. You know, as far back as I could trace my lineage, nobody really gardened. They were always very dependent on getting their food from markets and outside sources. I do have a full-time job. I work in custom home building, construction. I manage their material procurement, which has me constantly looking at supply chains and what's going on in the world, and how far and how crazy our supply chain really is. And during COVID, I noticed on the beachside homes that we build that we were getting a shortage in aluminum. So when we do beachside garage doors, we can't use the steel garage doors that we have over on this side because it's just too salty. So all of a sudden, we didn't have access to giving them their proper garage doors. So what that triggered in my brain was, well, geez, if we're having an aluminum shortage and we can't get these garage doors for these people, well, what else are we dependent on in aluminum? And I realized that a lot of our canned foods were made out of aluminum, a lot of our drinks are aluminum, and I had gotten this foresight to taking a little bit of my money each paycheck and just kind of like stocking up my pantry, right? So I had a bunch of canned vegetables and a bunch of canned soups and a bunch of bubbly waters, and I basically became like a prepper without knowing it. I was like, oh great, my family will be able to eat for a year with all this canned food, and I'll buy it now while the prices are cheap. And I did. I was getting canned food for like $1.25 a can, like, you know, prices that are not the same right now. So as the months went by, the prices did go up. I never heard the news actually talk about an aluminum shortage or anything. I just knew that inflation was happening and the prices of food were going up. But I knew, because I tracked material procurement, that it had something to do with the shortage of aluminum. As that year went on, I started eating through all of my canned soups and all of my canned products, and I started to realize, well, all that did was buy me a year, you know? Now I'm having to go to the grocery store and rebuy soups at like 3 times the cost, you know? Get an organic tomato soup for $3.99. It was just ridiculous to me. So I started to get really angry, and I kind of harnessed that anger into like, how can I, you know, not waste all my money on buying food? Like, we live in Florida, we have access to all this sun. Like, why can't I just start growing my own food? And there really was no good reason why, except for I never learned how, my parents never learned how, nobody taught them, nobody taught me. So at what point am I just going to just learn myself? Like, I'll break that cycle. I'll be the one in the family lineage to learn and then start passing this knowledge on. And so that kind of started my journey. I got some raised beds and just started getting some soil from Home Depot. I wanted to learn how to seed my own plants, so I wasn't depending on having to always buy my plants elsewhere. And I had a really great, successful couple of seasons right off the bat. Right away I realized that I was growing more than I could cook, and I needed to figure out a way to preserve it. So about 6 months into my gardening journey, I had to teach myself how to can and preserve my food in different ways. I had to learn how to cook the weird food that I was growing. You know, like, I could grow a bunch of Seminole pumpkin, but if nobody taught you how to cook a pumpkin or what to do with a pumpkin, you know, they just make good decorations. So I had to like teach myself how to cook, teach myself how to preserve, find all the different ways of preservation, look into the history of how people preserved food back in the old days, because you can't really Google this stuff, you know, they're not really forthcoming. The knowledge isn't really out there. And then from there, I started realizing, like, wow, I can a bunch of jelly, and I will never have to buy jelly at the store again. And I could can a bunch of pickles, and I will never have to buy pickles at the store again. Soups, chilies, all this kind of stuff. I was like eliminating things from my grocery list, and I was saving myself a ton of money. And I was having kind of a lot of fun doing it. It was a creative source for me. I started getting into herbalism, finding the different herbs that grow in Florida in our area, and then learning how these herbs can benefit our health, benefit the flavor of our foods, all the different benefits of that. I started growing those herbs. I got into folk herbalism, making my own tinctures, learning how to forage, teaching my kids how to forage, drying my own teas, drying my own supplements, drying my own spices and herbs. I mean, I was checking things off the list constantly. I started growing my own loofah sponges, so I didn't have to buy sponges anymore. Before you know it, it was kind of more like a game of a challenge of like, how little do I really need to depend on outside sources? Like, how much can I do myself? And then that turned into, well, I'm only on a quarter acre, you know, I'm only in a neighborhood, there's only so much that I could do for myself. But I started like building community, you know, a community of people whose family has land and they hunt. So now we barter this for that, and I've got some meat in my fridge. I started bartering my chickens' eggs for somebody who makes sourdough, so I have access to sourdough bread. So we just started bartering with other like-minded people in the community, and then before you knew it, like there's really, it's almost like kind of like infinite amount of things that you could source with us as a community and make us a lot less reliant on, you know, the stores and consuming other products and things like that. So the first thing that I kind of wanted to talk about is homesteading, sovereignty, being free of the system. Is the first change that you need to make is your mindset, right? We've lived in a society where we're told us that our resources are scarce. We're constantly living in the mindset of scarcity. And I am here to tell you that we need to change the scarcity mindset and realize that abundance is infinite. As I go through and teach you and talk to you about all these things, I'm going to explain to you how like planting one seed of like an okra will give you 30 okras, right? And then one dried okra pod seed has probably like 300 seeds inside. So like one little plant of a seed will give you multiple of these pods, which gives you like 300 seeds each. It's just like, and that's just like one example of a million. You know, you put a little bit of time and effort into something, you're growing it, you're gonna have more than what you could use, and you're gonna be sharing it with other people. And then vice versa, you know? So before you know it, everything that you have access to is going to expand. Becoming aware and responsible with sourcing food. Something that I get a lot on my social media is, oh, it must be nice to have some land, or must be nice to own a house. You know, I get a lot of, you know, kind of people that are feeling very victimized by the society that we live in, where they feel like they can't afford it, or they don't have access to it, or they live in a food desert, or whatever the case is. I want to squash that by saying you don't even have to have a house or have land. You could live in an apartment, and there's still ways that you could bring self-sufficiency into your lifestyle. A big one that I think is really cool is foraging, like learning how to forage foods and herbs and stuff from our land. We have access to a lot of parks and nature walks here in Florida, and there's a lot of resources online. There's a lot of books that you can get that talk about foraging and how to forage mushrooms, how to find things that are edible, how to find things that are medicinal. And I always love to look at what like the native people that lived here before us, like how were they eating food? What were they eating? What were they using as medicine? You know, and it's like really hard to find that information. You have to really dig deep or talk to somebody who, you know, has a little bit more knowledge than you do. And the more you go on these deep dives, the more rabbit holes you fall into. the more you kind of realize that, man, all this knowledge is really kept from us, and there's just no reason why it should be other than they just want us just to consume and not have it available to us. But there's lots of books out there that teach you how to forage, how to find mushrooms, how to just look around depending on the season. A book that I would really recommend for people that want to be a lot more self-sufficient is Rob Greenfield, Food Freedom. He came to Florida and lived here for about 3 years with the goal of setting up a bunch of gardens for other people so they could have food sovereignty on their own land. And then he made a goal that he was only going to eat what he either grew or foraged. And he was in Orlando and did this. And this book is his journey of like how he was able to source like enough coconuts for coconut water, enough avocados to, get his, fat intake up, all the beans and looms that he had to eat. He started this journey as like a vegetarian, and about halfway through, he started having to eat fish, and he did start to have to hunt some small game. But he was able to do it and just lived off the land for a full year in Florida, and just figuring out like he knew it was coming up to be mango season, and he had already been marking down where he had been noticing mango trees that were, on public land that he would be able to forage legally, and he was able to mark it all out. And so as the different seasons changed, he was able to eat the whole time. Really, really cool, fascinating book. He even has some recipes in the back, which I thought was really cool. So you could live with your parents and still be able to forage. Hunting and fishing is something that you could also do. You don't have to live in a house or have property to fish or hunt. It's not my specialty, but I think it's really cool when I see young kids riding their bikes in my neighborhood, with their fishing poles on their back, and they're, going to the river or whatever like that. I love seeing that. It makes my heart really happy, because you learn how to fish, you could feed yourself. You're a lot less dependent on the food system. And I used to be kind of weirded out, I don't know if I want to eat something from that river or from that lake. But then somebody was like, have you seen commercial farming, fish farming? Anything that you get from our river is going to be 100 times better than commercially farmed fish. That's got to be the worst thing ever. So, and maybe it was just the way I was taught, to be I'm not eating from that. But now I'm kind of if it's coming from nature, it's way better than anything from the industrial food industry. There's a lot of food that you can grow in pots, in grow bags, in containers, on a balcony, on a porch. A great example is sweet potatoes. My mom grows her sweet potatoes in one of those old school recycling bins, those blue bins. She just had my stepdad drill some holes in it, and she puts her slips in there. So it's you don't even really need a whole lot of access to a lot of space or a lot of land. There's herbs that grow on pots, just tons of things. When you start to really kind of open your eyes and look on Pinterest, try to observe how other people are doing things, you'll get tons of ideas. And then if you do have some space, bigger space, you could grow some fruit trees in pots, you could put some fruit trees in the ground. I have friends that live in HOAs that ask their HOA if they're allowed to, they have to get special permission for it, but you don't know if you don't ask. If you live in an HOA, you might be able to get away with planting some fruit trees or putting up a garden in the backyard, maybe if it's behind a fence. But another thing that a lot of people come at me with online is oh, well, my HOA would never let me do this. And, you don't know if you don't ask, Bartering and trading with other people is another great way of being self-sufficient, even if you don't have land or a house. If you learn how to make sourdough bread, if you learn how to make jams and jellies, if you know how to sew, right? Let's say you are I will stitch that up for you if you can give me some of your produce, or if you could give me a dozen eggs, my husband could fix the leaky sink that you have. Different ways of bartering and trading, just as an outside source, just being kind of creative about how not to, have to spend your money doing something. A lot of times, people are happy to do that. You know, just like let's eliminate having the transaction of money. And then if all else fails, try to shop local, family-owned farms, local farms, keeping the money in the community, not continuously padding the pockets of already rich CEOs that own these like, you know, bigger businesses. Sometimes it's a little bit more money to shop locally, but if you have the means, or if it's something that's really important to you, it might be worth, you know, supporting a smaller farm. So if you do have a homestead, whether you are renting or if you own a house, different ways that you can become more self-sufficient would be to harvest your own rainwater, putting trash cans or buckets, or if you go on Facebook yard sale page, they often have those like 5-gallon buckets that you could just put some mesh screening on top to keep the mosquitoes out, and then just drain your gutters into that. On Facebook Marketplace, I got one of those big 500-gallon cubes that I put up on some blocks and then ran my gutter into that, so I have a really great source of water. Believe it or not, it's illegal in some states to harvest your own rainwater, to keep your own rainwater. Florida's not one of them, luckily, and it's kind of silly because I'm not hoarding the water forever. I'm just catching it when it's raining, and then when it's dry, I'm releasing it. It's such a silly concept to me, but in Florida, we don't have to worry about breaking the law there. I use the rainwater a lot to fill up my gardening, my water.
What are they called?
Yeah, you know, watering can, thank you. You know, to do like my pots and things like that. I do have an irrigation system for like my main garden, but when I've got seedlings, or you know, if I need to water something when it's extra dry, I'll use my rainwater from there. And in a pinch, I have ran my rainwater through my Berkey filtration system to filter it out. That's what people that are off grid, that's how they do it. And again, if you Google, can I drink rainwater? You'll get all these warnings, like warning, warning, it's not safe to drink rainwater. But if you say, could I run this ditch water through my Berkey, is that safe? It'll say, oh yes, your Berkey can 100% filter out all the microbes and chemicals and through ditch water. I'm like, okay, well how did water get into the ditch? You know, like I can't drink rainwater, but ditch water is okay. So you get so much crazy stuff when you go on the internet, but some of the stuff you just gotta like use your own common sense with. Another way you could be self-sufficient on your homestead is to start composting. There's a lot of different methods of composting. None of them are glamorous or pretty. I've tried lots of ways. I try to keep my homestead looking very aesthetic because of my social media page. I don't often show you my compost. It's never cute. But right now I have, I guess like the 50-gallon drum cut up with the lid cut off with holes punched in the sides. And I just put all my garden clippings in there, all my food scraps. You just kind of Amazon boxes. You want to layer greens with browns, and when you live in a kind of an urban society, the best, cheapest free brown that you could get is the brown cardboard boxes. So I don't recycle them. I try to put them back down to build my soil. And it takes about 3 or so months if you continuously kind of aerate it. You might even need to like add a second or a third one. I have 3 right now, just because I have such a big thing going on. But at the end of the season, now when spring comes, I'll be able to use all that compost that I've been working on for the past 3 months, and I'll use all that compost to amend my spring garden. So you're kind of like composting for your future season. Self-sufficient homestead, another thing that you could do is when you do start planting your own plants, and you're researching, okay, like how do I keep it alive? How do I keep pests away? Okay, how do I know when to harvest it? Okay, now how do I know how to save the seeds? Because that's a tricky too. So many different plants have different ways of getting the seeds, and it just takes a little bit of research. I try not to do everything at once. There'll be like one plant in particular that I really want to learn about, and I'll just kind of like do a little deep dive on that. I might watch some YouTube videos, I might reach out to another homesteader that I met online, I might read some blogs and just kind of come up with some ways around that. But like, for example, these are the okra seed pods. I'll just kind of, you guys can kind of pass them around. I guess pass them all down this way, let's look at them. And you could shake them, you could rattle them around, you could hear that there's like a ton of seeds in there. And my first thought was, oh, I'm gonna harvest all my okra, I'm gonna cut my okra up and I'm gonna like eat it, and I'm just gonna take these green seeds out. But a lot of seeds you need to, so you can't eat all the food at once. You have to leave some of the food to dry out, and that's a hard concept sometimes because you're like, I want to eat it. So you want to at least leave like 20% of whatever food that needs to fully dry out in order to get the seeds. So that way you could plant again for the next season. So at this point now I'm in a good little routine with most of my plants. These are loofah seeds. The loofah is a sponge that you could use for your body. You could wash dishes with it. There's different ways of processing it. I usually just cut mine into thirds. But a loofah will give you hundreds and hundreds of seeds too. So before you know it, you're gonna have so many seeds to share with other people. And you're gonna have so many seeds for that next growing season. These are moringa seeds. But basically it's really great when you are able to like make your own soil through the compost, water your plant through water that you've harvested yourself, replant the plant with the seeds from the mother plant that you planted the season before. You're in this closed loop cycle where you're not having to go to Home Depot, you're not having to go to Tractor Supply, you're not having to order things. You can dedicate a few really great crops and just keep it in-house. I mean, it's fun to get different varieties. I would never say don't do it at all. But once you get a cool variety, let's try to like save the seeds, get enough for your own personal self, and whatever is extra, maybe you give it to a friend, or maybe you try to make extra money by packaging it and selling it on social media, or you have like a little makeshift farmer's market that you could do. It's just a lot of ways that you can, keep it all in-house for yourself. Another way to make your homestead self-sufficient is to grow non-edible plants like bamboo that you could build trellises with. I'm experimenting by growing cotton this season, which is actually pretty successful. Beeswax for candles, shampoo ginger, loofah sponge. You could grow decorative flowers. And then you could also grow your own fertilizer. There's different plants that are considered green manure or chop and drop that you grow specifically to chop it down and then to put on top of the soil to continue to feed the soil and give nutrients to the soil. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about is just resourcefulness. Again, like the humans as a species, we are great problem solvers. We're not trained to problem solve anymore. We're just kind of trained to like memorize information and regurgitate information, and we're not really training to think for ourselves. But it's really fun when you start to switch your mindset into being more resourceful. You could find a lot of salvaged materials for different projects around your homestead. When I was building my chicken coop, it was after one of the hurricanes a few years back, and all the docks were all demolished on Indian River Boulevard in Sebastian. And when they started pulling all the dockwood out of the river and started stacking it up for, the city to come take to the landfills, I was like pulling out dockwood, pulling out like good pieces of wood, like good pylons. I was like, I'm gonna make my chicken coop out of this stuff. It's gonna be a fortress. So it's just like, it feels good to like not have to spend money on something. It feels good to like keep something from going into the landfill. And it's just like, it's creative. You can start saving good glass jars for food storage. It's a slippery slope. Because like then you start hoarding glass jars. So I try to be really specific. Like if the label is too labor intensive, like I just have, all right, you're gonna get recycled. But for the most part, you could soak your jars in some hot soapy water, and most all my jars are reclaimed. And it also helps you just kind of decide what you're gonna buy. So if there's like a peanut butter that's like in a really good jar, wide mouth, yeah, compared to like a plastic one, it's like 50 cents more. Like I'll spring because I know I want to keep the jar in the lid. Something else that I keep on my homestead is I save all my chicken feed bags because they are completely waterproof. So I'll cut the top off, I'll use the bag, and then once the bag is done, I'll save them. And then every so often, I'll go out to my aunt's property. She's got some cows on some property out in West Bureau. And I will just like spend the day just like scooping poop and putting it in the feed bags. And I'll fill up like 5 or 6 feed bags of cow manure. At this point, usually it's just like a puck, so it's not gross or it's not stinky. But if it was, you'd want it to be in a waterproof bag. I put them in the back of my trunk, and I drive them all the way back home. And then I fertilize my yard with that. So it's just a good way to transport, you know, maybe some icky stuff that you wouldn't have a better way of transporting it. The bags are tougher than like a garbage bag. There's been times I went to the beach and grabbed a bunch of seaweed, because seaweed makes really good fertilizer. And again, like you just want to like have some, you know, free storage bags. And once like the poop is in it, I like don't use it a second time, you know, depending, but it's just nice to have some of those feed bags around. And I'll collect neighborhood tree trimmings or plant material. When FP&L comes before the hurricanes and starts like, you know, trimming all the stuff from around the lines, I'll go with my wheelbarrow and I'll grab any good like firewood. Tree material and plant clippings are also really good for starting your raised beds. When you put your raised bed up, you don't want to fill the whole thing up with dirt. It would just be incredibly expensive. And there's no organic material to break down. So you kind of want to fill like half of your raised bed when you get started with all that like plant clipping and plant material. And the best way to do that is just to like forage it from your neighborhood. I think my neighbors are like, they all know that I do that. And sometimes I'll ask if it's a new neighbor, like, hey, that's like some good wood out there. Are you just gonna throw that away? Like, you mind if I come back with my wheelbarrow? But at this point, they all know, like, I'm that person that's just gonna, hey, that's good. You're gonna just throw that Christmas tree out? Because, like, I'll have fun burning that in my backyard. So yeah, just like looking for old resources, rebar, old t-shirts. I cut old t-shirts up into strips, and then I use those strips to like tie my tomatoes to the rebar, you know, so that way my tomato plants don't pop out. 'Cause it's just like, you could go to Tractor Supply and buy string, but it's like, why? Why do that? Does anyone have any questions? I know I'm throwing a lot of information out.
I have, I don't know if it's a question or thought, but like when you buy your plants at Home Depot or Lowe's, like they're definitely GMO plants, would you say? Like modified? Are there any organic options
To buy?
Yeah, or do you like recommend starting from seed?
I never got a plan.
Right.
I went right, I said, this is the way God does it,
Yeah.
you know, and I just started throwing seeds. I'm not saying that works all the time. I do have friends that they start their seed. So this is nothing too, you know, we have a network. After this is done, I encourage everyone to like meet each other and shake each other's hand, or maybe we'll have some time for you could tell me about your experience. But there's some people that are so good at like starting a seed in a small pot and then watching it get to a seedling and then like putting it into a slightly bigger pot and then watching that grow a little bit bigger. You know what I mean? Some people have the patience for that. I don't. So I do more of the survival garden. David the Good, his method is just like throwing seeds and nature strong to survive. You know, I'm a little bit more organized than what he is, but if that's your thing and you really take to it and you're really good at it, that's so awesome. I haven't been able to successfully do it that way. I just make a little trench in the soil and I sprinkle my seeds down and I cover it up. I make sure it's watered and I like pray. You know, I just kind of like, you guys could do this.
How do like critters and things not get your? I've tried gardens in the ground, and it seems like no matter what, like critters get to them.
Yeah.
What do you